This film was so successful on so many levels that you couldn't turn around without seeing one form or another of it.
It just happened to hit at a great time. It played all through the end of December, January, February, March, April, just kept going.
It's had a very powerful impact on the world, which is great because it's a pretty powerful script.
In a store, you'd see the fashions everywhere. If you were listening to the radio, you'd hear the music everywhere. It was really overwhelming.
I think a 16-year-old of 2007 could watch Saturday Night Fever and see that its themes are resonant for today.
It shot John Travolta to international fame. No one knew at the time that it was going to be such a classic, and in many ways a complete period piece.
Nobody realized that we were working on anything that somebody was going to want to make documentary material about 30 years later.
I'm glad that I was a part of something that touched people's lives to the degree that that did, that had such an impact on so many people.
It appeals to everybody, all these young people, and I think throughout the world, it seems now, really identified with this thing.
It was so embraced by the public, and then the media ran with it, so it was pretty much everywhere.
There's three elements. There's how Travolta figured, came from one source, Nick Cohn another source, and the Bee Gees.
The first thing I saw was a script that did not read as a musical, even though there were musical elements clearly indicated there, but it read as a story of this young boy in a city that he was going to be too big in, and it was a wonderful character piece.
I liked John Travolta in his Cada television series a lot, and when he was about 17 he auditioned for me on Broadway for Jesus Christ Superstar. I thought he would make a marvelous movie star, so I started thinking of a film subject that would be good for him.
Stephanie, I can walk you home.
Look, nothing personal, right?
Oh, come on, Stephanie, I can walk you. Ah, Jesus Christ.
The thing that sparked it for me was I picked up New York magazine and saw a cover story by Nick Cohn called Tribal Rights of the Saturday Night. And I read it. I thought, this is the film.
We were looking for the right thing for John, and this was something that John read the article and instantly committed, and there was something about the character of Tony Manero that just caught his attention.
It was more than a dance disco movie. For us, it was a real gritty film about this experience, and that's what was the appeal to me when I looked at the original article and I looked at the script that they had. And I went to the Odyssey Club before my first audition to check out the experience because I wanted to see how these guys dressed and stuff, and it was intense. Very tough, very Italian, very gritty. And so I think we really tried to capture that.
Something primal in the place, That's why he called it Tribal Rights of Saturday Night. It's like, it's as if you stumbled on it, and this probably really sounds far-fetched, but it's between the loud music and the pulse, it's like you stumbled onto some tribal African, where they're beating the drums and they're all dancing themselves into a frenzy. And it was this moment with the first sort of shiver that went down my spine of like, oh my God, there is something really special that is going on here.
When anything, I think, becomes that hugely, dominant, people tend to forget what originally made it dominant in the first place. That's lost, that's erased, that kind of becomes a distant memory. And, it tends to overwhelm the source of what caused that popularity to happen in the first place.
But the basis, the foundation, the basic script by Norman Wexler is just first rate, and that's the thing that holds up over time.
I would have to say that the integrity of the movie would have to be a testament to Robert Stigwood. Some of the sexism and some of the racism and some of that content is stuff that we would never put in a movie today. Certainly it was Robert setting a standard about what he felt the movie needed in order to be real.
Everyone was nervous about the film, paramount about the language, particularly. I wouldn't budge on that because Norman's dialogue was perfect at how the kids spoke.
Oh, fuck the future.
No, Tony, you can't fuck the future. The future fucks you. It catches up with you and it fucks you if you ain't planned for it.
It was really raw. You know, I can remember seeing the movie and kids online said, "Would you get me a ticket?" This was after the screening. And the young kids wanted tickets to see it, you know.
When I went back to Michigan, where I grew up, back near Detroit, all of my buddies used, you know, that were still around, thought that I wrote this film. They said that, you know, one guy said, yeah, they all identified with different characters, and they were convinced I had something to do with it.
The director had us improvise as the characters for 2 weeks. And that created the reality, and it was real. It was really happening. It was more, this film is more like a documentary than a Hollywood movie, you know what I mean?
I've always felt this was kind of a commentary of that decade, really, in a way, similar to how Rebel Without a Cause is the 50s. This is the 70s in many ways.
I talked to John very extensively about Rebel Without a Cause. We were very conscious of that film. Very conscious about the James Dean-Sal Mineo relationship in Rebel Without a Cause. I remember bringing it up to him constantly, and John being extremely excited and receptive about that. And it fueled our relationship in the movie.
Tony Manero is a real original, and yet he's very evocative of a lot of other things that I think are part of the history of the motion picture business. And it's why you're able to get a great actor and a great performance out of John Travolta, and certainly some of the best work of everybody else that's involved.
It was pretty awesome to work with somebody that was that famous, and when you think of his fame now and his fame then, it's a totally different world.
Initially, when we started outside on the streets of Brooklyn, we were hit by a riot of 15,000 people who were just so excited to see him and wanted to get in and completely stop our filming. I don't think they were malicious, but there was just like a big party out on the street. And we literally had to shut down and go home because we couldn't get anything done.
Before the film was announced, when we had begun work on it, I went shopping with John Travolta one day. We were in the store about 45 minutes. John tried on a couple of things. Everything was very pleasant. And we began to realize that there was a big crowd forming outside. So to get us back into the limo and through the street, we had to make a call to the local precinct and get escorted. Because within that 45 minutes, there was a huge crowd of kids had gathered outside.
I do remember one particular time we were in the trailer, and John had gone in there a little earlier. I think he had his hair and makeup done, and he was waiting to start, and I went in there after him, and the kids in the neighborhood knew he was in there, and they started calling him, and obviously he couldn't go out because that would have been a mob scene. But they started to shake the trailer, which was really scary. I mean, suddenly this trailer started to rock like a boat, and I think they pushed up the security at that point. And even though it was really nice that they liked him and they wanted to see him, it was really frightening to be inside that trailer.
Go!
I think the third day of shooting, and this is all a little overwhelming because you got to understand there's crowds of thousands. There's got to be 3,000 kids behind barricades at the end of a street, and you've closed the street and you're shooting. So here we are, and we're in this ridiculous Chevy, this yellow and red Chevy. So Barry's behind the wheel of this car, and the barricades break. The kids rush the police, and they break through like we're in Cuba in some foreign country with a political unrest, and they run up and they're beating on the car. John's screaming, "Let's get out of here." You know, we're all freaking out. He's laying down low, and we're yelling at Barry to get going. He hits the gas, and we take off, and we end up blocks away, hearts beating, adrenaline pumping, kids grabbing on the car trying to run after us. I mean, it was unbelievable, that experience.
My wife is Didi Khan, known, among other things, as Frenchie in both Grease movies. She told me an interesting story this morning. John had finished shooting Saturday Night Fever and was working on Grease and hadn't seen it all put together and was very concerned about both the movie and his performance. He hadn't seen any of it yet, and the kids kept asking him, what is this And he said, I'm not sure. I don't know what it adds up to. I haven't seen it. I'm not sure about my performance. But he invited them all to a screening when he first saw it and they first saw it. And they got up and cheered at the end. And they said, John, stop worrying. The movie's fantastic.
So when you saw people start turning up, and then day after day after day and week after week for weeks, seeing that continue to happen was, very exciting to watch. Within like 2 weeks, Bob Hope is in a white suit dancing on some Bob Hope special.
Parodies of Saturday Night Fever were, for me, one of the greatest thrills of doing the movie. And in particular, I think the Saturday Night Fever sketch where Dan Aykroyd, I think, played Paul's character, Double J.
It probably has been parodied, probably because it's so clear what it is. And they always say that flattery is complimentary. And then they made the Broadway musical of it. I was in London doing this movie United 93, which we filmed there, and Saturday Night Fever was there in London. Big hit.
One of the significant effects of the movie on culture, I guess, is, you got to look at the reality show like Dance Fever. I mean, everybody wants to know who's going to be the next John Travolta, who's going to win the contest, which is what the movie was about. Is he going to win the dance contest? And this show became one of the most popular shows, ever.
Well, I think the good thing was it made way for a film like Billy Elliot, and for the consciousness of men to say, "Oh, I could dance. That's cool."
It's a great compliment to the film and to John Badham that people are still touched by it, and even though it's 30 years ago, it still does touch a chord with people.
30 years? I mean, that's unheard of. I mean, there are movies that are classics. Yes, Casablanca, well, those films that are called, so-called, the classics, and they'll pop up, but not with the mass audience that Saturday Night Fever generates.
I was thinking about years ago when we were making the movie, nobody sat around and planned to make some great pop culture, kitsch, Smithsonian time capsule of bell-bottoms, glitter balls, and platform shoes. It was merely a story set in a working-class discotheque that dealt with an identity crisis and a kind of profound questioning of society's rules and society's values. And if the film had been set, say, in a fishing plant or a cannery in some small industrial town in northern Scotland, I wondered if we'd be sitting around here today discussing the nostalgic charms of a halibut.
30 years later, we're sitting here having a conversation about a movie that impacted people's lives in such a way that I continue to hear about it to this day from people about it was a turning point in their life. It was a seminal moment in their life. It said something to them. It spoke to them. I can think of other films from different eras. I mean, for the disaffected youth or something that struck a chord in young people especially, you had Rebel Without a Cause in the 1950s. You had Easy Rider in the 60s. You had Saturday Night Fever in the 70s. Probably Fast Times at Ridgemont High in the 80s. Something touches a nerve. This movie somehow did that and also transcended it.
Norman Wexler hit such a nerve, with characters that we believe in, we recognize, they speak to us. I was from Alabama, a little kid from Alabama, and I understood those characters. They're enjoyable to watch. And that seemed to work all around the world. So that's pretty rare that you get that kind of feeling, and should last for a very, very long time.
They're genius composers. I mean, have you heard the harmonies? Those are harmonies that go way back into the 15th century.
They were the fuel that drove the music in that movie, and I think drove the feel of it. I give them complete credit for that. They did a fantastic job.
The music from this film, I think, had its own life. It was so successful and so much the anthem, I think, for this decade. The Bee Gees were very popular and then even became more so.
Really the soul of that movie. You know, John strutting down the street in his, at the beginning, what would that be without Stayin Alive?
I was very keen to promote the film ahead. So I released, I Think You Should Be Dancing. It was a #1 hit before the film was released.
People still, all over the world, you play How Deep Is Your Love, no matter where you go, and it'll crowd the dance floor.
But it's still the biggest ever selling soundtrack in the history of the business.
The Saturday Night Fever soundtrack had a very sort of complex beginning because we were coming off 2 major hit albums. First of all, the Main Course album, which was produced by Arif Mardin at the time. Then the Children of the World album, which we did ourselves, which was our first for Universal at that time. And they all produced quite a few hits, including You Should Be Dancing, Of the Children of the World, Jive Talking, both are #1s on Billboard.
And up to that point, I think in 1973 or 74, we were pretty much done for. I mean, any group that was popular in the 60s, nobody really wanted to know about in the 70s. That's just how it went. And I think we were looking to revitalize ourselves or to do something with great energy. And during Main Course, we had discovered my falsetto voice, which I didn't know I had until Arif Mardin suggested I go into the studio and sing some ad-libs over nights on Broadway. And I did that and discovered that there was this falsetto voice hiding back there. And not for long, folks. And we started using that for everything, and that became the new sound, you know.
They've had 3 or 4 lives, as you know. Their writing's so brilliant that they reinvent themselves. They're still the Bee Gees, but then you see another aspect of their talent.
Well, I think Robert was very clear from the beginning this was an opportunity, and the Bee Gees had been in a really interesting creative trajectory for 2, maybe 3 albums before the Saturday Night Fever album.
It was during that time that year period that Robert called up and told us all about this article by Nick Conn, or Tribal Rights of a New Saturday Night. And he said, can you give me some ideas for songs for it? And a few ideas which had been rolling around at that point were Night Fever and Stayin Alive, and all probably would have been turned into songs and recorded anyway, you know. And I gave him those titles, and the humorous thing about it was that he felt that Night Fever was too pornographic to be used as a title for a film.
Kiss me. Kiss me.
I said, well, that's at the back of my head right now. I said, but I'll call you if I have any more ideas, and we'll get together and see if we can come up with something. And that's how it started.
I think the great thing about writing the music for Fever was that we never saw Fever. We never saw the film. Remember, it wasn't even called Fever because we just didn't know what it was called. I'm calling it Fever now because that's what everyone knows it as. We would just have to be in the studio in France at the time this was happening. And he was able to call us and ask us if we could start writing. And that's when we said, well, we're nearly in it. We've actually got a lot of songs written. If you want to come over and listen to them, they're here. And really, it's just snowballed from there.
It was a great studio, and it had an amazing echo chamber, which was an old baronial hall, I think. And so it was a great experience in that respect. There was nothing else to do but record.
It was a 16th century building. We'd live there, sleep there, and it was a little village nearby. And Elton John had recorded Hunky Chateau there. A lot of artists had gone there to record, and just, you know, just have fun and make music. And it kept you focused. And that's what we did. And it wasn't written in the middle of New York City. It wasn't in the London club scene. It was actually done in the middle of French countryside.
You Should Be Dancing was taken from Children of the World. So they were taken, some songs were taken from previous albums because Robert liked them and wanted to put them in the film and felt that they applied. So in a sense, everybody at the time thought that all those songs had come from one album, and they hadn't. So it was only really about 4 or 5 new songs.
The reason they ended up in the film is because while we were writing, those were the songs that John Travolta and the cast were rehearsing to.
Stayin Alive, for instance, is really all about the strife that our culture's in, and New York City, perfect example of that. And quite prophetic, in fact, because it talks about buildings breaking and everybody shaking.
If you listen to the lyrics of Stayin Alive, it's not really about dancing at all. It's about surviving in the modern world, particularly in New York at the time, surviving in New York City, being part of all the struggles and stresses of modern-day life. And for instance, you had the 9/11 Trade Center attack in September of 2001. Well, in the following February and March, when the Grammys was on, it was they played Stayin Alive with the images of that terrible time, which highlighted the way New Yorkers felt. Because in the lyrics, New York Times affect the man, feel the city shaking, everyone break. It actually portrayed a feeling about how New Yorkers felt at that time after 9/11.
The first reaction we had when we first saw the film, which was at the Chinese Theatre in LA with John Travolta, watching the audience in front of us, and all of us standing at the back of the theatre, watching the backs of all the audience, and that was thrilling just to watch that, to see the responses, and the one thing that stood out was that you could hear the feet on the dance floor louder than the music, and so we had to point out to Robert that when you're in a club, you can't hear the feet, You can't hear people stepping and making moves. You only hear the music. And they took that point and raised all the music up, all the dance music.
The Bee Gees have always written very strongly melodic music with usually a very strong hook in every one of the songs. And what they were able to capture here was really music that was incredibly strong, also had a musical hook, but lyrics that sort of matched up to a character that had appeared elsewhere.
And it seemed, thinking about it afterwards, that they had really deliberately written songs for specific places because they worked so well where they were placed. They just seemed to fall naturally into place.
Well, the first visible example of the soundtrack taking off to us was on the set of Sgt. Pepper. We were making a movie called Sgt. Pepper for Robert, along with Peter Frampton and a lot of other great artists. And during the lunch break, well, everything was just being released at the time we just started filming. And we had one Winnebago between us, the three of us, and Peter Frampton had his own Winnebago. And the music started to hit the sound stages at around lunchtime when everybody was getting out of lunch. They were all going dancing. And suddenly the Fever music was all over the lots. Wherever you went, the Fever music was being played, and instead of people having lunch, they were all dancing. And so we suddenly saw this, noticed it. And a week later, we couldn't get arrested, And Peter Frampton, of course, could. Not that he did. But within the next week, we had a Winnebago each. And Peter still had his own Winnebago. But we'd gone from one Winnebago to 3. So that was a step up, That's a big thing.
And of course, the reaction was amazing, considering that there was no hype, no promotion, there was no budget promotion, and it was like queues around the block, lines around the block in every city from Chicago, New York, every major city in the States. And I remember being with Robert in December, him getting a phone call from the head of Paramount saying they'd seen nothing like it. And we had suddenly reached another level, a level we never dreamed we could reach. My first thoughts were that this has never been done before. This is a movie with music about today, that day, at the time they lived in. And right up until then, most musicals were period films. They were about another time. And this was, strangely enough, one of the first films made about the day that people actually lived in and about what was happening at that moment. And I think that's what really excited the imagination of a lot of people all around the world.
And I think for the next 20 or 30 years, we became a really good live band. And that was what we enjoyed most of all. And I really mean that, because that's how we grew up. We didn't grow up having hit records. We grew up playing to audiences.
Absolutely brilliant. Everyone talks Lennon McCartney. The Bee Gees, the Gibb Brothers, the songs of theirs that are anthems worldwide, just unbelievable.
I have to say that the music is what has lived on more powerfully across the world from FIEBRE. The legacy of the film is the music. It's one of those few things in history that have had the impact that it has. So it incites the imagination, not just of the people who lived through that period, but of young people today, because young people like to be part of musical history, and that's what FIEBRE was.
So from being pretty much dead in the water in 1973 and 74, we were certainly back. We're certainly back again, you know. And there's been these types of things in our lives the whole time. There's been about 3 different eras for us, you know, and this was certainly the biggest one.
The fashion ideas in the film were based on kids who didn't have a lot of money, but who lived to dance on Saturday night.
It was such a popular fashion at the time to look like you were just about to go dancing. And if you didn't dress that way, I think you were looked upon as out of it or not cool.
It's okay, the 70s. Big hair, big shoes, a lot of bling.
Great disco shirt was the Nick shirt. It was a wildly patterned jersey shirt on polyester.
It was an era of people expressing themselves. We express ourselves by our jewelry, by our craziness.
My impression of the fashion of the disco era was ghastly. You know, those long collars, and I mean, I think that's also what's so satirical about it. And those really high shoes the guys wore. And
if you only knew how many white suit, black shirt imitators there were in America at the time.
I think it was just a very specific time where people were very into their look and really wanted to create that look and be that person, and they kind of all had that swagger, and they wanted to wear those polyester clothes that I think now are outlawed.
What's up? We've been waiting, man.
I think the early 70s began coming out of the 60s, obviously, as a broader, more cartoony, brightly colored, awkward fabrics. Some of the classic looks of the 70s would be tight-fitting jeans, high-waisted, tube tops, dance dresses, clothes worn much tighter than you would ever expect them to be nowadays. Companies like Jordache and Calvin Klein really came to the front.
The things that I saw when I visited the clubs were always clothes that were geared toward movement and light. Clothes were mostly synthetics, usually shiny, sometimes enhanced with sequins or embroidery or what have you, but they reflected light.
If you were going out to a club in New York in 1977, you would, as a woman, wear as little as possible, a great disco dress with some nice movement in the skirt and spaghetti straps, or a tube top.
Now we have Stephanie Mangano and Tony Manero.
I'm going to call it an innocent era. Everybody was emulating what they couldn't be. Everyone wanted to be John Travolta. Everybody felt they could be him, a guy from Brooklyn, you know. I think everybody wanted to be those guys in a car
I actually used Saturday Night Fever as a bit of research when we started the 70s show, and the things that I always think about are those fitted leather jackets that the guys wore with the gold chains, and it was a real sort of New York culture.
I think many of us felt when we began the film that there was a strong component of class and class differences. Our guys in the film are not fashionable people. They are lower middle class. They are simple boys. They don't have a tremendous amount of education, and yet they have dreams and hopes and aspirations, but their dreams center on being the absolute best dancers in the best club. For Tony Manero, in his circle, he is the king because he's the best dancer. And that's what gives him prestige and honor in his neighborhood. You want the characters to be true to the story. And yet, because they are heroic characters, you want them to look very good. So we took great care with very small things, exactly the right belt and exactly the right handkerchief and et cetera, et cetera. We had to make sure that the clothes moved beautifully in dances. And we wanted them to not look custom, and we wanted them to look not expensive. These are not kids that have a tremendous amount of disposable income, and yet they would save and scrimp and go without lunch all week in our story to buy that special shirt out of their meager salaries.
Hey, you guys do layaway?
As long as it don't turn into a 20-year mortgage.
All right, look, put me down for $5 for that blue shirt in the window. Hold it for me.
Hey, wait for your receipt.
One of the major things in the film is the right shoes. It is a film about dancing, and they had to have just the right shoes. Our shoes were not especially popular at that time, but we kind of made them so. And we found most of those shoes in a strip in Manhattan called 8th Street with many, many men's shoe stores. And all of them pretty outrageous and usually very uncomfortable, but they got used to it. That particular scene of walking away and you see the shoes, they're worn by the most awkward and the most troubled of our group. They're all trying to imitate Tony Manero's style because they feel he is the most accomplished and certainly the best dancer. That's what makes him the king of this particular circle. So all the guys are trying to follow his lead. And the thing about this very young guy is he doesn't fit those clothes. He's not into those shoes yet. So of course they look very awkward on him. And it's a wonderful exit from the scene, is that walk away. Grooming was intensely important for the guys. I virtually do not recall seeing face hair at all. But I saw lots of hair, beautifully styled and coiffed even, one might say, and trimmed and wonderfully styled.
When I think of the 70s, I think of this, the fashion and the hair. The hair was so hairsprayed and so stiff that if a strong wind came, it would just break off and blow away.
Obviously, the Farrah Fawcett hairdo was the hairstyle of the century, practically. I mean, everybody wore it for way too long. And Dorothy Hamill, that was another iconic 70s look, the wedge. And it was sort of the beginning of big hair as we know it, I think.
I love the way they did my hair as Doreen because it went like perfect flip. It's so out of it. It's great. You know, it looks like she worked on herself for hours. You know, have the groove. It was great.
The story behind the sketches is that I very often attended rehearsals, dance rehearsals, because I wanted to see how the characters moved. I made this quick pencil sketch. This was before we filmed the actual work, and it's not especially accurate as to what the suit looked like. I kept it in a notebook, not knowing the dance would in fact become such an icon. The sketch of Stephanie actually turned out to be worn by someone else. I did make the sketch for Stephanie before she was cast. I hadn't seen her and didn't know her. So I elongated the figure quite a bit. Stephanie, the actress, Karen Lynn Gorney, is a very petite girl, very delicately boned, and this was way too much dress for Stephanie. She wore another dress, and she looked wonderful in it.
Hey, geez, look at this. You're beautiful.
Once the film was released, there were 20, 30 people at a time wearing white suits walking down, 44th Street, and it was a little strange to see.
I pressed hard for the white suit because I think in this world that these guys live in, I think heroes wore white. And I think Tony Manero's a hero.
I was given a John Travolta shirt with the image of him in the white suit, pointing his finger to the sky. That is now part of my collection that I believe we used once on the 70s show on Wilmer Valderrama.
One of my first jobs was a television film, filming in Georgia. And I had taken a truck one afternoon to go to a shopping center that I'd heard about. And as I rounded the hill, I saw a 30-foot blow-up of John in the suit in a parking lot. And racks and racks and racks of suits. And every kid who was going to a prom within 50 miles was there picking out his suit. I was appalled, flattered, amused. I guess I have to say flattered most of all, because all those kids had the same kind of dreams that Tony Manero does. And I guess they thought that maybe having a suit would make those dreams come true.
There's something about disco, if you've ever been to a wedding, that it can pretty much make anyone dance.
You get on a dance floor and you're dancing and there's people around you going, ooh, 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 and going, and it became addictive for many people.
Back in the late 70s, the DJs were the celebrities.
But I was a character in New York, I had long hair and I was tough and smoked cigarettes. I was gay, before gay was gay.
So you had your neighborhood clubs and they were hangouts. Studio 54 was an event, it wasn't a hangout.
If you were any part of that crowd, sooner or later you found your way through Studio 54.
I'd go to the clubs, I'd get in at 11 o'clock in the morning, noon, because they were after-hours clubs, they were open all night. You'd dance all night.
Once Saturday Night Fever came out, disco was everywhere.
By the time Saturday Night Fever came out, disco as an underground force was really reaching its end. Disco really came from the underground clubs in New York, the gay clubs.
There's something about disco, its genetic disposal is to make people feel happy, even when the music's actually quite sad. And it's also the base ingredient of all modern dance music, from hip-hop through to house music.
You had this movement which was about hedonism and freedom, and obviously there was a lot of sex and drugs connected with it. And I think when a film like Saturday Night Fever came out, it showed the glamour of that without necessarily showing the seediness and without necessarily showing the whole reality of it.
If you lived in New York, you go to after-hours clubs. Disco was just exploding. It was all over the place. So I loved, I was into that experience as a New Yorker.
I'd grown up around a lot of guys like Tony Manero, and I knew those guys, and I got those guys. When I went off to Europe and then moved back to New York, it was a moment where there were discotheques. Regine's was on Park Avenue, and there was a whole underground club scene in New York.
And here came this major motion picture, and not only was it everywhere, it was also a big, huge hit.
The disco era, as I remember it, was ending when our movie came out. And then it relaunched it. It was a whole new resurgence of it, and actually sent it it made it far more popular than it had ever been.
Hello again, this is beautiful Monty, your delicious DJ. Remind you about the universe.
In New York, DJ culture was so far advanced of anywhere else on the planet. The artists were fairly anonymous, and it was the DJ who was at the center of it all. So in terms of DJs, it was the coming of age for the disc jockey. Things like mixing records was first done where people realized that, hey, if I mix these two records together, the people won't leave the dance floor.
Take a 3-minute song and make them into a 12-minute mix. People used to rush to the dance floor. There were certain songs that were kind of theme songs during that era.
There was this kind of frenzied creativity amongst the DJs in New York as they all realized that they could do much more than just play music. They could play it their way, they could recreate it any way they wanted.
Hey, be cool, baby!
I began to hear this music, this beat, the disco beat, and I want to be part of it. I knew this was the way to go. It was. I'm a nightclub person. I'm a night person. I did drugs, alcohol. My nights were spent at the discos, and I was the gay Liberace and drag. I was the, hey man, I could do that, you know. So I became the disco queen.
And even till now, that was the era that the DJ became a celebrity. We were creating seamless nights. Well, some of them were not so seamless, but we were creating nights of excitement and entertainment for many hours, usually 8 hours a night.
Oh, come on, we got some ups, we got some downs, 3 lubes, 2 J's, and half a bottle of vodka. Right?
They handled the rehearsal process brilliantly, and one of the things they did was take us to Brooklyn together to the 2001 Odyssey. We were just completely blown away. First of all, the movie makes it look fancier than it was because they added in a dance floor and they did a whole bunch. But it was really a local club. But you immediately struck by the personalities of these kids.
It was working class kids getting together just to let off steam and really demonstrating, you know, their own, you know, talents through dance.
A lot of them were working menial jobs, and this was their one chance to cut loose, and they came here and strutted their stuff, and the energy in that place was just incredible.
Yeah, Brooklyn and Manhattan were like completely different. These guys, you know, didn't like Manhattan, didn't go to Manhattan. They, you know, they were from Brooklyn. That was their thing.
It's very, very, very much what the movie's about, and what the John Travolta character was like, which is why he played it so perfectly in the movie, that you really followed him, especially somebody like me, who is a boy from Brooklyn. You followed him ultimately to how he got across that bridge and what that meant to him. And all those enticements and all those demons were there in that movie as they exist at the door to Studio 54.
When a club the size of Studio 54 gets packed on a Wednesday and a Tuesday night, then something's going on.
It was like Halloween every night, is really what it was like. It was one big party every night.
It was the greatest dance palace ever built around the disco industry, around the dance music thing. It blew people's minds. I mean, here you have like a whole lighting system coming down, big panels coming down, straight down, right? Then going like this over your head, providing a ceiling over the dance floor that's just above your head, and all of a sudden, after that song is over, the panel goes up, and then a whole new light system comes down.
Everybody's dressed to the nines in the latest fashions. The mirror balls are going. There are light shows on the wall.
It was the beginning of the velvet rope, and for a lot of people, the velvet rope was the beginning of the end, and the velvet rope was about cordoning people off, and those that got through the velvet rope were in the club, and those behind the velvet rope were out of the club.
It was the first time anybody had a door policy. You know, very exclusive door policy.
I remember showing up at Studio 54 praying that my name was on the list.
They actually would close the club for private events. So, for example, if it was a Tuesday night and Stevie Wonder wanted to have a birthday party for his secretary at the club, they would shut the whole place down and they would turn the public away. So there'd be 200 people in a place that could hold 2,000 people, and they didn't care. They didn't care that they turned people away, which obviously creates a big mystique on top of that too, because people always want to go in some place they can't get into.
Studio 54 was where I hung out. I was a character. I was welcomed by them. I never had to wait to the door. I came in with my diamonds and my entourage.
A couple times a week, there'd be a celebrity smash on the cover of the New York Post, whether it be Cher or Sylvester Stallone
Liza Minnelli and Halston and
John Travolta was there.
Bianca Jagger.
They had the best of fashion, you had the best of film, you had the best of music.
But we were the ones that made the show. We were the ones that created the show. I mean, if you didn't have a Monty Rockin and a Grace Jones, and you had nothing.
Studio 54 was an amazing place. I just went back there a few years ago when they did Cabaret there. I sat in there. I couldn't concentrate on the show because I'm sitting there looking around going, well, I remember what I saw going on there. I remember what I saw going on there. That place was just out of control. Where the kids in Brooklyn couldn't afford it, these people all had money, and I met a lot of terrific people.
I got in, and I think the idea that I got in sort of overshadowed being there. I was sort of amazed at being, you know, in the presence of Andy Warhol, Liza Minnelli, all of these people that at the time represented 54 and were such, you know, staples of that place.
Steve Rebell was very friendly with Robert Stigwood and, you know, Kevin McCormick and all those guys. They had the party at Tavern on the Green.
We went to Tavern on the Green in New York after the premiere that night, and we were interviewed by all the local radio stations. It was a nice party, and we were treated really, really well.
At the end of the Tavern on the Green, then we all go over to Studio 54, which I had heard about and kind of wanted to go to. And we get in there, and Liza Minnelli's there, and Halston's there, and all the people that hung out in Studio 54 are there in the middle on the couches, just as you hear about, and we're there partying with them, and we're sort of the, you know, it's our scene.
That was a great era for anyone who survived it.
There's always been dance music, but it was just this era where so much of it was coming out.
I don't think disco has ever gone away. I mean, just the power that it has to get people dancing is something that producers ever since that time have picked up on. And you'll hear disco sampled in hip-hop records, in house records, in electro records. And right through to the present day, there's always a form of music that is popular that is pretty much just a reheated version of disco.
So it's still there, till today. It's just evolved.
You could see right away, you know, this tremendous energy and talent.
One of the nicest people I ever met, in his heart, in his class, in his caring for people.
He loves the work. He loves to act. There's a reason that John Travolta's a star.
A very generous actor to work with, very present. It was really a gift.
He was so down to earth, and he was so concerned with the project and making everyone feel comfortable.
I've never known John, in my experience, to ever put himself above anybody.
He started to get a lot of buzz, you know, a lot of teen mag buzz off of Welcome Back, Kotter. And Stig would say, well, let's go sign this guy to a 3-picture deal.
We just washed the hair.
Yeah.
You know, I work on my hair a long time, and you hit it. He hits my hair.
Some of the funniest lines in the film are ones that were ad-libbed by John. So it's a complete delight to work with somebody like that.
He's a guy that just jumped into the experience, and it was absolutely breathtaking to watch somebody be so confident and so committed to the performance. Pretty exceptional thing.
He's a superstar now. At the time, he was a star, obviously, and he was very popular. Plus, he's an incredibly nice person. So I think that was a natural thing for him.
I found John to be completely genuine from the moment I met him. And I say that with no, you know, not just because I'm sitting here doing an interview, but having worked with him. I sincerely mean that. I think he's a genuinely caring, good person who goes out of his way to connect with people. I have nothing but fond memories of working with John. It was a great time, and every time I've seen him since, it's the same thing. We pick right up where we left off.
Now we have Stephanie Mangano and Tony Manero.
At the premiere in Hollywood, John put me behind him, and I felt that was kind of special that he thought I was the fun guy. He orchestrated my importance in this film, and I felt that was something people don't do anymore. They don't share the limelight. He did.
He's a very, very generous actor. Very generous and very present. I was very blessed that the first movie was working with someone as gracious as he was.
The thing is, the Highgate of 2001 is just dancing. It's not being a best or nothing like that. The thing is that I would like to get that high someplace else in my life, you know?
It's interesting about John, how he has carved out a niche for these iconic roles. I mean, you do know Tony Manero in Saturday Night Fever, Inside and Out. You know Danny Zuko in Grease, Inside and Out. You know his character in Pulp Fiction and Edna in Hairspray. I mean, he has had iconic roles through the decades, and I don't think there's an actor like that where you can just have a signature role for each of the decades.
It's the movie that sparked the disco inferno.
I like your new haircuts. I like that polyester look.
And turned a sweat hog into a superstar.
I just knew that it was it, that this was my opportunity.
Saturday Night Fever was a dark tale of a dead-end kid who seeks glory on the dance floor.
That movie hit a nerve all over the world. Everybody understands dance. Everybody understands taking your gift and seeing how far it will take you.
That film really, really represented what I think every young person wanted. It was every man's film.
But the making of Saturday Night Fever was anything but magical. It proved to be a long and trying odyssey.
I remember thinking, will I ever get through this movie? Will I actually get it done?
First, Travolta had to work for months to master those disco moves. Then, Travolta's crazed fans nearly halted production by swarming the set.
Thousands and thousands of people. It was a mob scene.
The fans, oh my God, they were all over him. It was scary to watch.
And in the midst of filming, John Travolta lost the love of his life.
We were in the family's house shooting there, and I remember John sitting in the corner just totally gone.
I thought that he was going to fall apart. I was just sorry to see someone who had so much life in them have to go so early. That was hard on me for a while, actually, that loss.
But he pulled himself together, pulled on that tight white suit, and became an icon. Now, the gritty little film that sparked a polyester revolution.
I love to watch you dance, Tony.
Saturday Night Fever, the story behind the music.
I love to watch you dance.
It all started with a strut. When John Travolta stepped onto the streets of Brooklyn, he ushered in a new era in pop culture and music.
The rock revolution had turned serious, even depressing, and then suddenly came this simplistic, innocent music. Disco is really as innocent as the pop of the 50s.
America had suffered through Vietnam, Watergate, and a lingering recession, and people were yearning for an escape hatch from reality.
They were tired of looking for the answer blowing in the wind. They were like, you know what? Give me a cocktail, give me an outfit, I want to have sex, forget about it.
Pessimism was out, hedonism was in. And in the pleasure palaces of the early 70s, urban dwellers were dancing away their problems.
You didn't go there to have a conversation about political issues. You went there to, like, look good, dance, have a drink, and be seen.
Are you as good in bed as you are on that dance floor?
Before the release of Saturday Night Fever, disco was primarily an underground lifestyle. That drug-laden, sex-drenched atmosphere had never been captured on celluloid.
Disco was very much a New York phenomenon. It was underground, it was black, it was gay, and it was the first time we had seen something like that on screen.
But when John Travolta's polyester-clad dance moves hit the suburban Cineplex, it triggered a social movement.
I think this movie kind of shook free from the general depression and drabness of the political and musical atmosphere of the 70s and remembered that what music is really about, especially if you're young, is having a good time. Going out there and dancing. It's Saturday night. You've got the fever.
The fever can be traced back to June 7th, 1975, when a 13-page article appeared in New York Magazine. It was a fictional account of blue-collar Brooklyn kids who danced away the weekend inside neighborhood discos.
My manager had read an article called Tribal Rights of a New Saturday Night. And he said that, you know, one day, if they ever make a movie of this article, you'd be perfect to be in it.
Little did John know those plans were already being put in motion by an Australian music mogul named Robert Stigwood.
He had a nose for talent, and he had a nose for money, the two things.
Stigwood laid out $90,000 for the film rights to the article after his assistant, Kevin McCormick, secured a preview copy.
The article was published. It caused a lot of stir. A lot of other people tried to buy it, only to find out that we'd bought it already.
I grew up in the business, and I knew opportunities were far and few between, and that when you had one, you had to take it seriously.
Travolta knew this was the role that could take his career to the next level.
If somebody told me he was practicing to be a bitch, is that true?
As written, his character was dark and complex, right off the mean streets of Brooklyn.
Jesus Christ!
Tony Manero was racist.
And if Spicks, they dump on us, so we gotta dump on the Spicks, of course.
Sexist.
We make when I decide, all right? No other time.
And foul-mouthed.
I'm sorry.
In the winter of '76, director John Avildsen, who was about to score a box office knockout, signed on to direct the film.
I'd just done Rocky. It hadn't even opened yet, and the buzz was good, and I was the boy of the moment.
But as filming for Saturday Night Fever approached, Avildsen was having second thoughts about the script. Travolta says he was upset because the director wanted to soften his character.
He wanted me to be this kind of guy that did all the favors in the neighborhood. It was a sweet idea, but it was not the movie I'd signed to do. So, frankly, I was just very unhappy with the direction it was going.
Tensions continued to rise, and just weeks before filming was set to begin, producer Robert Stigwood summoned Avildsen to an emergency meeting. Moments after Avildsen arrived, Stigwood received news that the director had been nominated for an Oscar for Rocky.
Robert walked in and said, John, there's good news and bad news. The good news is you've just been nominated for an Academy Award. The bad news is you're fired.
He said, I don't want to ruin our friendship.
Just weeks away from shooting, the production of Saturday Night Fever was thrown into chaos. The future of the film was in doubt.
I don't believe this. You're trying to hang this on me.
In 1977, it plugged suburbia into the electric hustle and propelled disco out of the underground.
Now, when Saturday Night Fever came out, that was it. I mean, I never saw so many white suits and the hairstyles.
It's so beautiful, man. I like your new haircuts. I like that polyester look, man.
It was every man's film. Everybody wants to cross the bridge, go to the glamorous spot in Manhattan, be on the dance floor, be noticed.
But the moves that made John Travolta a superstar didn't come naturally.
It was rough getting into shape for it. I had to drop 20 pounds. I danced 3 hours a night, plus ran 2 miles a day. By the end of that period, I felt like a horse in training.
Travolta had been dancing on the Broadway stage for years, but he had never set foot on a disco floor. So in the fall of 1976, with the movie still in development, Travolta started rehearsals. Denny Terrio, a disco champion who went on to host Dance Fever, was brought in to coach him.
And I started doing the floor splits, and I started doing all the points and the knee drops and all these moves that he used in Saturday Night Fever, and he looked and said, that's what I want to learn.
Footage of those rehearsals was buried in a closet for more than 2 decades, and Travolta is seeing it here for the first time.
So there's a Barbarino haircut. I'm not as slim as I was when I did the movie, as you see, but I got the moves starting to work. This is 7 months before we shot, you see. We didn't even use a lot of these moves in the movie.
He was hungry. He was easy to teach, and he just wanted it so bad. Women love men that can dance. It's just a proven fact. And I wanted the women to love John, not because he was Barbarino or John Travolta, but because he could move.
Travolta was hungry, but he was also conflicted. He was dealing with a personal crisis. His girlfriend, Diana Hyland, was suffering from breast cancer. The two had met a year earlier while working together in the TV movie Boy in the Plastic Bubble. It was Diana who encouraged John to take the role in Saturday Night Fever.
She said, you know, really, honey, this is great. This character's very angry, edgy, you know, has a lot of depth, and I see the dancing you're doing. She said, I think this will be really extraordinary for you to do, and you should pursue it.
But in early 1977, it was still unclear if Saturday Night Fever would ever make it to the screen. Just weeks before production was set to begin, the director had been fired, the leading lady had not been cast, and the script had not been finalized.
You don't have a script, you can't lock down locations, and you can't lock down casts, and you're not exactly sure where you are going.
Producer Robert Stigwood and his assistant Kevin McCormick shifted into crisis mode.
I said to Robert, well, what do we do now? And he said, get a director.
Within 2 days, I was on a plane to New York, and I had the job of getting the picture going in 2.5 weeks.
Director John Badham had only one previous film to his credit, so Fever was going to be trial by fire.
Suddenly you begin to realize, oh, Lord, this is a major musical. We had no locations, we had lost our designer, so there was a lot of scrambling going on.
Priority number one was landing a leading lady. Script changes had delayed the casting of Travolta's love interest for months.
You know that girl?
No.
Hundreds of women had tested for the role, but they couldn't find anyone that matched Travolta's charisma.
She can dance, you know that? She got the wrong partner, of course, but she can dance.
A chance encounter in a New York taxi cab was about to land Karen Lynn Gorney the role of her life.
We hustle some guy into sharing a taxi with us, and it turns out that it's Robert Stigwood's nephew. And I said to him, oh, well, what do you do? You know, he said, oh, we're making a film. And when anybody says that, I said, oh, am I in it? And he said, well, I don't know. I said, what's it about? And he told me, and I said, well, that girl sounds like that's me.
The second she stepped out of the cab, Karen got her agent on the phone.
I said, listen, Jerry, I'm going to kill you unless you submit me for that role. And he submitted me. And I went to see Shirley Rich, the casting director.
I thought she had something, and I thought very sensitive. Not just a pretty girl who could do the part, but there was a great deal of sensitivity in Karen. And it was a great match for him, I thought.
I'm really changing as a person, and I'm growing. You know what I mean? Nobody has any idea how much I'm growing.
When's you go on a diet?
With the cast complete and the final touches put on the script, shooting began on March 14th, 1977 on the streets of Brooklyn. John Travolta's strut set the tone for the film, but in order to get the shot, cinematographer Ralph Boda had to think on his feet.
I wanted to have the camera really low and to see his feet, to see his shiny shoes. We made a rig on a dolly with a handheld camera and a very wide lens. That was spur of the moment.
Over the years, Travolta has fought off rumors that those famous feet belong to a stand-in.
It's all me except for one shot, which I was very upset about. The shot that's not me is when the shoe is put in the window compared to another shoe, and the guy that did it kind of bounced a little bit while I was doing it. And I got furious because that was not what I would have done.
But shooting exteriors in Brooklyn quickly turned into a nightmare due to Travolta's TV stardom. Once word spread that Vinnie Barbarino was in the neighborhood, fans began to flood the set.
All right, please, everybody back up.
We had absolutely no preparation for the fact that John was a phenomenon. We show up for the first day shoot, and there's like thousands and thousands and thousands of people. It was a mob scene.
The fans, oh my God, they were all over him whenever they could be. And it was scary to watch swarms of people coming out of nowhere.
We didn't have enough cops, we didn't have enough barriers, we were completely underprepared for it.
So we literally, by noon of the first day, had to shut down and go home because there was no place you could point the camera without seeing 15,000 people.
And I remember being very flattered, but I also remember thinking, will I ever get through this movie if we do it mostly on the street and they're going to be that level of fan out there, we'll actually get it done.
Ultimately, the production staff came up with a scheme to outwit and avoid the crowds.
We would have to put out fake call sheets and get out there like 5:30 in the morning and get set up and shoot before it got too busy.
But the crowds were only the first of many obstacles the film would face. It was the perfect marriage of music and film. A cinematic breakthrough that pioneered a whole new breed of Hollywood movie.
It was a musical. You just had to categorize it as a new form of musical.
It's a musical in which music basically animates pretty much every scene, but nobody breaks into song. So in a sense, it was a hybrid.
Saturday Night Fever was the first modern film with a soundtrack as important as the script.
Feel the music, baby.
It's not just an excuse to have a lot of disco songs. Look at that. Tony is in the disco contest, and what he wants to prove and what he's trying to do with his life is organic to the music.
Keep on, Tony, dance.
The music supported the film, and the film supported the music, and the music reminded you of scenes of the film.
In March of 1977, principal shooting was underway, and the pressure was mounting on John Travolta. It was the 23-year-old's first shot at a lead in a film. But it couldn't have come at a worse time. His girlfriend, Diana Hyland, was terminally ill with breast cancer.
It wasn't easy because we were working 6 days a week, 15 to 18-hour days.
Then, just 2 weeks into shooting, John received word that Diana had only a few days to live. He immediately flew back to Los Angeles and rushed to her bedside. On March 27, 1977, Diana died in his arms. She was only 41 years old.
I was just sorry to see someone who had so much life in them have to go so early, you know, and that was hard on me for a while, actually, that loss.
But he would allow himself little time to grieve. Within days of the funeral, he was back on the set, immersing himself in the role Diana had encouraged him to take.
I thought that he was going to fall apart. I really didn't know what to expect when he came back from the funeral.
He came back and we were in the family's house shooting there, and I remember John sitting in the corner just totally gone. And then we'd say, you know, we're ready, and he'd pull himself together and do the scene.
And the best thing for me as a 23-year-old was that I had very little time to dwell on this, and when I did, it was at night in bed, whether it's crying yourself to sleep or dreaming, a lot of dreaming.
I cannot tell you how much I respect him for how he handled that and how he came back from that and continued to build that character and deliver the performance that he did.
The emotional upheaval that Travolta endured helped him to create a complex, multi-layered character, both angry and vulnerable.
You got nothing but 3 children now. Good. I didn't mean that. I'm sorry. I never say that. I love you, Mom. I really do.
He understood that character in a way that I don't think any other actor would have understood it or could have portrayed it.
You know how many times somebody told me I was good in my life? Twice. 2 times. This raised today and dancing at the disco.
Travolta's portrayal of Tony Manero was a far cry from a sitcom sweat hog, though he was able to use his comic instincts.
Some of the funniest lines in the picture are just things that just came out of his mouth, just ad-libbed.
One of those ad-libs was Tony's classic response to his father's slap on the head.
We just washed the hair. You know, I work on my hair a long time, and you hit it. He hits my hair.
I came up with it on the spot because he hit my head so hard when he whacked it that it stung. And I just thought, wouldn't it be funny if this character thought it was more upsetting
One pork chop. One!
that his hair was messed up than
that his head was throbbing.
Hey, where you been? Hey, the shirt, wash the shirt, stupid.
Oh, come on. All right, come on. Benjamin. Go ahead.
Travolta was able to improvise on the dance floor, too. Acclaimed choreographer Lester Wilson was brought in to supervise the dance sequences. But after witnessing the expertise Travolta had acquired after 9 months of rehearsals, Wilson turned him loose.
You really could sense what John could do and knew where to stay out of his way and sort of to choreograph the other people around him in conjunction with John's abilities.
It was pretty amazing because he had such an individual style and was able to make it his own.
Travolta's input also proved useful in arranging the soundtrack.
If you listen carefully to the songs, they carry the plot from one scene to the next.
It was like a good DJ, you know, and you go to dance and the DJ knows what to put on next, and sort of a DJ musical.
By the spring of '77, shooting had wrapped and editing was almost complete. But when John Travolta screened the rough cut, he was devastated.
The first time I saw the film, I actually was in shock because I thought the acting scenes were fabulous, but my solo dance that I had worked for 9 months had been cut in close-up. I cried when I saw it because I said, you know, all you could think of was all this hard work that you'd done, gone down right down the drain.
And there was wild disagreement about how it was going to be covered and what it was going to be.
Travolta was determined to get his dance moves back into the final cut of the film, so he called producer Robert Stigwood.
He said, look, don't worry about it. You go to the editing room. You know more about it than they do at this moment. You choose the takes that you like, and that'll be it.
Despite the objections of the film's director and editor, Travolta had been given final say over the scene.
They were very upset about the idea that I could come in. I said, look, I'm not going to take a lot of your time up. It's very simple. Stay in the master until you go to the mid shot where I go across there. That's all you do. That's all I want. It took 2 minutes.
2 minutes that preserved one of the most famous dance sequences in film history.
It was what movie musicals used to do to an audience, where you would just kind of sit back and go, wow, it's just defying gravity.
In the fall of '77, Saturday Night Fever was complete. The soundtrack had been mastered, and the film was ready for the public. But the question remained, was the public ready for it? It will forever define the age of disco. When Saturday night meant sex...
I gotta score tonight, man. I'm horny, you know what I mean? Horny.
Drugs.
Tell me what we got. We got some ups, we got some downs, 3 noodles, 2 J's, and half a bottle of vodka. Right?
And serious line dancing. But prior to its release, the studio did not consider Saturday Night Fever a sure thing.
Nobody expected it to do anything. Paramount didn't believe in it. The creative execs thought, well, this is terrible. It's a vulgar little movie. There's all kinds of bad language in here and nudity and rape scenes and God knows what all.
To make matters worse, in the fall of '77, there were rumblings of a rebellion against disco. Rumblings the filmmakers were all too aware of as they wrapped production.
I put the masters of this album, all 4 sides, in the back of my car, and it was dawn. I was driving down Hollywood Boulevard, and in front of me a truck had a bumper sticker saying "Death to Disco." And in the back of my car I had what was the result of like 9 months' work, and I'm thinking, we're too late.
My editor said to me right around the time we finished filming, why are we making a movie about a phenomenon that's dying?
I knew you'd piss on it. Go on, just piss on it, right?
Presenting the world premiere of Paramount Pictures' Saturday Night Fever, starring John Travolta.
When the film debuted on December 7th, 1977, Fever was already surrounded by a frenzy. Paramount arranged for an old-fashioned Hollywood premiere at Mann's Chinese Theater with the biggest stars of the '70s.
Tonight, from Hollywood, Peter Frampton, Penny Marshall, John Ritter, Suzanne Summers, John Travolta.
There hasn't been a premiere in this town, in this scope, in this excitement in many, many years. Is it uncomfortable? Is it kind of hard to handle because it's bigger than life and everything?
It is. And I saw the movie for the first time bigger than life. I mean, bigger than it ever had been. So it was like a fantasy. I mean, it was just like a dream tonight.
The audiences were awed as well. Saturday Night Fever topped the box office for weeks and went on to make more than $285 million.
It was just so sensational from start to finish. You know, the way it hit society.
It's like being strapped on a rocket, you know, and all of a sudden, boom. I mean, it was like hot, you know, everybody wanted to wear the white suit and look like us, you know what I mean?
Rather than heralding the death of disco, the movie ushered in its heydays. The music and the lifestyle were celebrated at nightclubs like New York's Studio 54.
You would see lots of clones of Tony if you went to 54, and those, you know, printed polyester shirts. I remember them very well.
Every shop you went had the white suit, and, you know, everybody had the hairstyle, and everybody had the chains, and all the ladies had the stacked shoes.
Dancing, it can't last forever. It's a short-lived kind of thing.
In the summer of 1979, disco's fate was sealed by bonfires of vinyl across the country.
They started burning disco records. There was a hostility towards it, towards the end.
We're talking about these big records, 12-inch records, and the paper covers that they came in, so there was something to burn. It was a huge, big, you know, we hate disco.
It's a film that set trends and captured imaginations.
Can I wipe off your forehead?
Why not? Sure, go ahead.
And its influence is still being felt today.
It was pop culture then, and it's pop culture now, because pop culture hasn't changed that much in these years.
I love to watch you dance. I just love it, watching you dance.
2 decades after its release, Saturday Night Fever is as relevant as ever, and much of the credit goes to John Travolta and the unforgettable character he created.
Tony, it's only dancing, Jesus.
Only dancing? Forget it, Annette. If you're not going to take this seriously, I don't want to dance.
The brilliant thing about John Travolta is that he was able to make you like a character who is basically unlikable.
Why do you hate me so much? All I ever did to you was like you.
You mean Brady Con?
Tony Manero became an icon, a working-class hero that legions of young men worshipped.
Kiss me.
And one of those young men was a budding film critic named Gene Siskel.
Gene went to see that movie, and it struck a chord deep inside of him, and he went back to see it over and over and over again. I'm sure that he saw it more than 20 times.
He never got over Saturday Night Fever, Gene Siskel. It was his heartbeat. It was his soul. He identified with my character, wished he was the character.
I think in a way, Saturday Night Fever was the teenage experience he never had. He would have liked to have had the clothes and been at the disco, and I think that Tony Manero just represented an alter ego for him.
Until his death in 1999, Saturday Night Fever remained Gene Siskel's favorite film. In fact, he was so captivated by it, he bought John Travolta's white suit at a charity auction.
He was very proud of it because it represented something tangible to him, not just a souvenir from a movie, but almost like Rosebud, the sled in Citizen Kane. It was almost like the key to something that he missed in his childhood or in his adolescence and always wanted to recapture.
More than a film, Saturday Night Fever was a milestone that perfectly captured a moment in time.
It's a time capsule. It's an incredibly good representation of a time and a place in the late 1970s in urban America, where a lot of disaffected youth are looking for some sense of identity.
It's a comment, I think, on that whole era The way Rebel Without a Cause was in the 50s, I think this film in many ways is that to the 70s.
And that movie really has held up, and it'll be fun in 25 years to look at because its themes are universal. Everybody understands dance. Everybody understands taking your gift and seeing how far it will take you.
That film really, really represented what I think every young person wanted.